Hey guys, tonight we're padding softly through the fog-soaked streets of a tiny Dutch harbor town, the lanterns swinging in the salty breeze, the sound of distant boat bells chiming like lullabies. Your boots squelch in the cobbled alleys, and from every window comes a golden flicker of tavern light, along with the laughter of people very obviously on their fourth or fifth pint. But it's not just beer that binds this town together. No, what brings us here tonight is furrier, droolier, and, let's be honest, more qualified than most politicians. You're about to meet the one dog who brought justice to beer taps and maybe caused a minor government crisis along the way. You probably won't survive this if you've got a weak spot for loyal dogs, eccentric Europeans, or unexpectedly functional democracy. This is that rare story where everyone seems a little drunk, and the dog's the one with the clipboard. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past low, wooden buildings painted in pale coastal hues, faded greens and stormy blues, until the road opens into a crooked square. The sea's just out of view, but you can smell it, tangle with the scent of yeasty bread and brine. This is Holland, 1851, a Dutch fishing town where people trust their neighbor, but not their neighbor's bar tab. The air is damp. The roof sags slightly under centuries of North Sea weather, and every tavern has a story. Most of them involve beer, boats, or someone falling into a canal. You duck into the warmth of the Dry Flesson, a pub with creaky floors, frothy mugs, and an ancient hound snoring by the hearth. His tail twitches at the sound of clinking glasses. That's not our dog, yet, but you'll want to remember him. See, in the mid-19th century, beer wasn't just a pastime. It was safer than water, literally. Dutch water sources could be wildly unsanitary, especially in coastal towns like this one. So people of all ages drank beer. Strong beer, weak beer, beer with breakfast. It was a social glue, a calorie source, and a minor miracle of fermentation. But here's the twist. Because of that reliance, people cared deeply about the quality of their brew. If someone tried to cheat you with watered-down ale or moldy barrels, that was treason, social sabotage, and a health risk all in one foamy gulp. That's where the town's beer inspectors came in. Yes, actual officials were appointed to taste, check, and certify the beer of every tavern, brewer, and traveling merchant. Think of them like grumpy sommeliers with clipboards, taste buds, and slightly less refined manners. Most were just locals trusted for their palate, or at least their sobriety. But this was also an era of slow-moving councils and endless paperwork. The inspectors weren't always thorough. In fact, some were suspiciously friendly with certain brewers. And that's where the scandal began brewing, pun aggressively intended. Historians still argue whether Harlingen's system was ever reliable or whether it was always one overly hot bribe away from collapse. But by 1851, tensions were high. Reports of bad beer were spreading like rumors through the fog. 2 pubs had been fined for using river water, in a port town where ships openly dumped bilge into the harbor. Several taverns complained that one inspector had a drinking problem that involved not spitting anything out. Confidence in the process, frothing over. And so, amid whispered complaints and increasingly sour pints, the townsfolk began joking. As humans do, one old fisherman raised a glass one night and said, "A dog could do this job better." People laughed. Someone else, probably 4 beers in, added, "At least a dog can't be bribed." More laughter, but then someone looked down at the sleepy old mutt lying near the fireplace and said, "Why not that one?" Cue the dramatic tavern hush. Then the laughter again, only now it had a note of danger to it. You know that feeling, when something silly starts to sound suspiciously reasonable. That dog's name was Speculoos. Yes, like the cookie. He wasn't anyone's in particular, but everyone fed him. He slept under chairs, beside fishermen's boots, and sometimes on warm piles of rope near the docks. He was large, brown and white, slightly square in the head, and known for barking once. Exactly once. At any barrel he didn't like the smell of, One innkeeper swore the dog had saved him from selling spoiled brew. Another claimed the dog refused to drink anything made with last year's hops. And so the legend began. And here's your first quirky tidbit. Speculators once reportedly chased a visiting Danish brewer 3 blocks down the street, growling at his kegs the whole way. Witnesses swore the dog looked personally offended by the contents. The brewer packed up that night. It was funny until someone put the dog's name on a ballot. Then it became hysterical. In the town spring inspection meeting, when candidates of the official beer curder, beer inspector, were listed, a smudged parchment appeared bearing only one name, Speculators de Holland. It had a paw print where the signature should be. The council considered throwing it out, but then came the public push. 30, 40. Then 70 townsfolk signed a petition insisting that the dog be considered a nonpartisan candidate. They argued that since Speculators showed no favoritism, had never accepted bribes, except scraps, and had a very strong nose, he qualified under the vaguely written local rules. No one had specified the inspector had to be human. One councilman quit. Another shrugged and said, "Let the people vote." And they did. The taverns buzzed with anticipation. Betting pools opened. Would Speculators win? Would he show up? Could you count Paul votes? Children painted signs. Bakers made dog-shaped cookies. And the beer? The beer got better. Fast. Every tavern, terrified of offending the new canine candidate, suddenly tightened their brewing game. It turns out fear of dog judgment was more effective than years of human oversight. And just like that, what started as a joke began to feel real, which is always the dangerous part. You're back in that square again, only now the mood shifted. There's an energy in the air, part carnival, part political rally, part confused dog show. Everyone's buzzing about the unlikely star of the hour. Specula's a dog. He trots lazily into the spotlight. Completely unaware, he's become the center of municipal politics. His ears flop with each step. His tail swings like a metronome, and behind him, 2 kids trail with a satchel of bones and a handmade campaign ribbon. Someone tries to put a tiny hat on him. It lasts 7 seconds. You follow him through the market. Past beer barrels stacked like oversized coins, the salty wind ruffling his fur. Shopkeepers wave. A cheese vendor shouts, "Vote Speculators. He bites corruption." Another merchant calls out, "He's got a better nose than half the council." That last part? Probably true. See, Speculators isn't just any dog. He's what's called a skeepshond, a harbor mutt. These dogs were bred and raised along the docks to be half pet, half pest control, part guard, part companion. They knew how to chase off rats, navigate slippery decks, and recognize the creak of a returning ship. Speculators had grown up like that, on rope coils, fish guts, and stormy afternoons. You get the feeling that, if needed, he could helm a rowboat or run a tavern all by himself. And in a weird way, he already had. You trail him into a place called the Zoot Molen, the Salty Mill. The owner, a no-nonsense woman named Latte, nods as Speculators walks in and circles the barrel in the corner. He gives a sniff, then a second longer sniff. Then he walks away without so much as a sneeze. "Good," Latte says, wiping her hands. "Last time he barked, we found mold." There's something magical about the confidence everyone has in him. He doesn't make a show of it. No grandstanding. No posters. Just instinct and history. And maybe a few leftover sausages. And here's your historical fact for tonight. In mid-19th century Europe, beer wasn't just regulated. It was sacred. Brewing guilds set strict rules, and towns like Holland enforced them with almost religious fervor. In fact, during the 1500s, the Reinheitsgebot, or German beer purity law, made it illegal in parts of Europe to brew beer with anything but water, barley, and hops. So by 1851, the idea of someone or something enforcing beer quality wasn't outrageous. What was outrageous was that a dog might actually be the best candidate. As you sit down and listen to locals swap stories, more tales about Specula's surface. He once growled at a keg and wouldn't let anyone near it, says a fisherman. Turns out it had spoiled yeast. Saved me from serving it at my daughter's wedding. He only drinks from the good stuff, chimes in another. I offered him a splash from a traveling brewer's batch last fall. He turned up his nose and walked out. And then the quirky kicker. There's a persistent rumor that speculators howled during the eclipse of 1847, precisely when the sun vanished, and 3 taverns had to toss their entire stock due to poor fermentation during the lunar cycle. Is it true? Probably not. But Harlingen runs on stories, and this one's too good to fact-check. Historians still argue whether the townspeople genuinely believed in speculators' palate, or if it was simply an elaborate protest against corruption. Maybe both. It was clever, after all. Harmless rebellion wrapped in wagging tails and wet noses. And it made people care. Care about their beer, about fairness, about something as silly and pure as a dog doing his rounds. You wander outside again. Posters now line the alleys. Some are crude charcoal sketches of speculators in a little sash. Others just say, "For honest beer, trust the ears." And then around the corner, you find the old council hall, gray stone, slate roof, guarded by ivy and apathy. Inside, the town's officials meet, and yes, they're still trying to decide whether this whole dog candidate situation is a prank, a problem, or a political miracle. One councilman is scribbling furiously, making charts comparing speculators' bark frequency to tavern complaints. Another has dug up the municipal code and is pointing out, voice rising slightly, there's no clause against non-human inspectors. And yet in the corner, the youngest scribe, barely old enough to grow a mustache, is sketching a little cartoon of speculators wearing glasses and reading a beer manual. Because even they can't help but love the dog. You trail speculators one more time as he visits a shady alley pub called the Leaky Barrel. The place is known for experimental brews and suspiciously cheap pints. As he approaches the doorway, a rat scurries across the threshold. He growls. Someone peeks out from behind the curtain, sees a dog, and groans audibly. Ugh, the inspector's here. The bark he lets out isn't loud, but it echoes. A moment later, 2 workers are rolling out a keg to be disposed of, muttering about overhopped sour messes and unfair canine audits. Specular sniffs the replacement barrel, licks the tap, and lies down satisfied. It's easy to forget that none of this was official yet. There hadn't been a vote, no form signed, no council decree, but already the town had accepted him. That's the strange magic of shared stories, of letting a town's imagination solve its problems when bureaucracy can't. And here's the thing about dogs. They don't lie, they don't flatter, they sniff out the truth, literally. And maybe, in a time when trust was fragile, that was exactly what Harlingen needed. You walk back toward you and under a sky stitched with stars. The town feels different, warmer, calmer. The beer's better. The laughter feels lighter. And in a window above, a child holds up a sketch of a dog, standing proud on a barrel, tongue out, eyes wise. Speculators is asleep again, curled up near the town's largest tavern. Tomorrow, the votes come in. But tonight, the town already knows what it wants. Honest beer, good sleep, and a little bit of harmless four-legged hope. The morning hits you with the kind of wet chill only a seaside town can conjure. Moisture clinging to your sleeves, fog curling under doorways, and the sharp tang of fish and damp timber. Somewhere, a bell rings to mark the hour. But you're not thinking about time. You're thinking about beer, and the chaos that's about to erupt from the heart of Harlingen. Because while the idea of a dog beer inspector has charmed the public, it's also lit a fuse under the brewing guilds, pub owners, and local politicians who suddenly realize they might be outsmarted by a creature who can't even read. You make your way toward the docks, where today's town meeting is set to be held in the open, because attendance is expected to be, well, enthusiastic. The crowd's already gathering, every third person holding a mug, a banner, or a sandwich. It's less government and more festival. A drunk carpenter is handing out dog-shaped whistles. Children run around with fake tails pinned to their backs. And yet, beneath all the laughter and steam rising from mulled beer carts, there's a tension that makes your ribs tighten. You feel in the way the town's main brewer, Willem Jans, paces by the harbor wall, his face red from more than just the cold. His family's been in beer for 3 generations. And today, he's not smiling, because behind the cuddly story, Harlingen's beer crisis is real. For the past 2 years, sales have dipped, not for lack of thirst, but because people have stopped trusting their pints. More than one batch had made locals sick. Others simply tasted off. The rumor mill did its part. Claims of reused mash, watered-down work, and one particularly infamous incident involving a dead eel found in a fermenting cask. And here's your mainstream historical fact. In towns like Holland, where clean water sources were unreliable and often contaminated, beer wasn't just for pleasure. It was essential for public health. Fermentation made it safer to drink. That meant brewers held incredible responsibility and power. When that trust was broken, the community didn't just lose its buzz, it lost its safety net. So when beer inspection failed, people got angry. And when people get angry, they get creative. Thus, a dog. But not everyone finds the idea so charming, especially the Guild of Brewers, who've marched into today's meeting wearing serious faces and tighter than usual vests. They present a formal complaint. The role of beer inspector must be filled by a trained human. The old system, they claim, just needs better oversight, not a mutt with muddy paws and a PR team. Their statement is met with a chorus of boos, and at least one child loudly yelling, "He's not muddy, he's majestic." And yet, the Guild isn't entirely wrong. Speculas, for all his charm, isn't trained. He can't read brewing logs. He doesn't know about temperature curves or pH balances. He just sniffs barrels and either wags or growls. Is that enough? Historians still argue whether the original inspection system was truly broken, or whether people had simply decided it was easier to believe in a dog than confront the rot in their own institutions. But at the time, it didn't matter. Public opinion was tilting wildly in favor of the furry candidate. You slip into a nearby tavern for warmth and find yourself seated beside one of the lesser-known brewers, Mike, a soft-spoken woman with ink-stained hands and barley stuck to her coat. "I think it's brilliant," she says, sipping a cloudy pale ale. Not because the dog's qualified, but because now everyone's paying attention. We've had more feedback in 2 weeks than in the last 5 years. And that's the heart of it. Speculas might not be able to write a report, but he's changed the game. Every tavern is suddenly competing to impress him. Pubs that once coasted on mediocrity are now polishing their taps, cleaning their tanks, and proudly declaring, "Dog approved," on chalkboards. Meanwhile, the town council is panicking, because technically, Speculas wasn't even supposed to be on the ballot. The election process was always a sleepy affair. 2 names, a handshake, maybe a pint or 2 in exchange for votes. But this time, it's real. The ballot boxes are overflowing. There are slogans, campaign songs. At least 3 different satirical plays were performed at last night's poetry pub. And in the middle of it all, the dog naps peacefully under a blanket at the foot of the speaker's podium, unaware that his approval rating is currently higher than any council member in recorded history. But not everyone's amused. A minor riot breaks out when a barrel of sour beer is discovered behind the meeting hall. The brewer responsible claims ignorance, says a cold affected the yeast. But when Speculas sniffs the barrel and growls, the crowd erupts. "Proof," someone yells. "He knows." Another yells. "Put him on the payroll." The council, desperate to avoid actual anarchy, makes a proposal. If Speculas wins the vote, yes, they'll hold the vote officially. They'll create a new title, Honorary Beer Quality Overseer. Not quite inspector, but close enough to matter. You glance at the faces around you, hopeful, skeptical, a little buzzed. Then back at Speculas, who is now licking his paw and ignoring the ruckus entirely. And here's tonight's quirky tidbit. One of the council scribes, in a fit of inspired absurdity, actually drafted an oath of office for the dog. It reads in part, "I do solemnly sniff and taste and promise to wag honestly in the face of deceitful Alish." It includes a clause about chew toy reparations and belly rub compensation. As the fog thickens outside and the crowd slowly disperses, you step back into the evening with a sense that something genuinely strange is happening. Not just a publicity stunt, not just a prank, but the rare moment when people take control of something broken and fix it in the most delightfully irrational way possible. Tomorrow the vote is official. Ballots will be counted. The council will have no choice but to recognize the outcome. And Speculas? He's still sleeping. tail twitching, ears flicking, dreaming, perhaps, of barrels and applause. It's dawn again in Harlingen, and the smell of fresh bread and spent hops mingles in the streets like old friends catching up. You push open a window of your little room above the tavern and hear it. Voices, lots of them, gathering, shuffling, laughing, the kind of early morning energy usually reserved for royal visits, or very large bar fights. Today's not a royal visit, and it's not a bar fight, but it might end up somewhere in between, because today, Harlingen votes, not just for a name on a scroll, not just for tradition, but for something absurd, beloved, and four-legged. Today, the dog runs for office. You follow the crowd down the alleyways, the buildings leaning close like gossiping grandparents. At the center of town, the square has been transformed into an unlikely combination of polling station, festival ground, and low-grade circus. A fiddler plays off-tempo sea shanties near a pie stand. A trio of monks from a nearby abbey argue quietly with a child wearing a specular's costume. Someone's rigged up a stand offering free licks equals free votes. Nobody's sure if it's for the dog or the voters. The ballot table is laid out under an awning, watched over by two of the oldest women in town, who treat the process with the solemnity of a religious rite. Each voter steps up, places their folded parchment into the brass urn, and is given a biscuit. Not a voting incentive, just good manners. Now here's the twist that really kicks things off. The Guild's last-ditch candidate is a man named Bastian Koek, a semi-retired brewer with a mustache like a broom and the personality of wet cardboard. He's brought in to be the reasonable vote, but it backfires. Bastian runs a campaign based on seriousness, rules, and eliminating canine influence in beer affairs. He might as well have declared war on joy itself. Speculas, on the other paw, doesn't even campaign. He simply is. And that's the whole point. The people have made him a symbol, not just of beer quality, but of everything they feel their town has lost. Simplicity, trust, and a little whimsy. You overhear one man say, "I don't care if he can't write a report. I trust him more than anyone who can." And here's your mainstream historical fact for today. Elections in 19th century Europe, especially at the local level, were often far less formal than we think of them now. In small towns like Harlingen, voter rolls were loose, votes were cast by hand, and counting was done by whoever looked most sober at the time. Sometimes, unofficial candidates were added just to make a point. But once the people rallied, well, councils often had no choice but to follow along. By midday, the line to vote is wrapped around the fish market. Someone set up a chalkboard to track real-time results based on hearsay and wild speculation. It's about as accurate as a drunken weather vane, but somehow makes everything feel official. Speculas is leading by a landslide. Bastian is clinging to second place, mostly due to confused voters and people too proud to admit they came here for a dog. And then, around mid-afternoon, it happens. Specula strolls into the square, perfectly on cue, his tail held high and his fur freshly brushed. Someone's tied a ribbon around his neck. Not a campaign ribbon, just something celebratory. He yawns, then saunters over to the urn, sniffs it, and plops down next to it like a sleepy little throne. The square erupts in applause. Not the raucous kind. The warm, genuine kind. People cheering like they've already won. Because, honestly, they have. But here's your quirky tidbit. A group of pranksters, probably the same ones who made the fake campaign song called Bark Once for Better Beer, present a formal request for speculators to make a speech. They even bring a small lectern. The dog sits behind it, licks his paw, then burps. And that's enough. Votes close at sunset. The urn is carried inside with great ceremony, escorted by candlelight and a three-piece band made up of whatever instruments weren't already in use at the pub. The council gathers to count, their expressions somewhere between resigned and awestruck. You wait outside with the crowd. Lanterns swing in the breeze. Speculas is now curled on a blanket beside a stack of wood. A child has placed a biscuit beside his nose like an offering. And finally, the doors open. A town clerk steps forward, clears her throat, and reads the results. Speculas, 346 votes. Bastian Koek, 29 votes. 2 votes for my Uncle Dirk. one for beer, and one appears to be a drawing of a cat. Not counted. The crowd explodes, not with chaos, not with rioting, but with that glorious, full-body laughter that comes when people realize they've done something ridiculous and beautiful and strangely right. There are hugs, cheers, a toast or 12, and in the middle of it all, the dog wakes, yawns again, and wags once. He's now the official, honorary beer quality overseer of Harlingen. And here's where things get weird. The council, trying to save face, holds a hasty ceremony that very night. They drape Speculas in a custom-made sash. They present him with a ceremonial bone mounted on a plaque. They even swear him in with a modified version of the inspector's oath, recited by the town's oldest barmaid, who solemnly declares, "May your nose be just, your tail be swift, and your bark strike fear into the hearts of sour brewers." Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of Harlingen's golden ale age, or just a blip of well-meaning absurdity. But one thing is certain. Something in the town shifted that day. People started caring more, watching closer, laughing louder, and most of all, drinking better beer. As the moon rises over the square and the last fiddler packs up his case, you take one last look at Speculas, curled again by the tavern door, snoring softly, entirely unaware that he's made history. Tomorrow, the work begins. But tonight, Harlingen belongs to the dog. You wake to the kind of silence that only comes after a raucous town celebration. Harlingen has a hangover of a place that partied itself into a new political reality. Outside, barrels sit slightly askew. Flags still flutter from upper windows. A lone accordion plays something mournful and slow. Either a dirge or someone's forgotten how chords work. Probably both. And as the morning stretches its arms across the town, the reality sets in. The dog won. Speculas, Harlingen's favorite harbor mutt, is now their official, albeit honorary, beer quality overseer. But what does that actually mean? You slip on your boots and head out. The fog's thinning. The sea breeze crisp. Near the docks, a cluster of townsfolk gather around the town hall bulletin board. Nailed to the old oak planks is a parchment titled, "Duties and Powers of the Beer Quality Overseer, Canine Classification." It's real, official seal, and all. The highlights include 1 weekly pub circuit, authority to inspect via sniff, taste if willing, or bark, immunity from leash laws during inspection hours, full access to all taverns, cellars, and brewing sites, compensation in the form of room, board, and an annual supply of beef bones. No one questions it. In fact, a few suggest that the council's human members should consider similar transparency. And so begins the first week of Speculas' term in office. You trail him as he begins his inaugural inspection route, accompanied by a rotating cast of local volunteers, 3 children, 1 baker's apprentice, and occasionally a retired sailor named Peter who insists on carrying an umbrella in case of barrel splash. The group is known unofficially as the Wagon Committee. At the Crooked Cask, the first stop, the tavern owner greets Speculas like royalty, presenting a fresh keg with theatrical flair. The dog sniffs the tap, stares, then sits. Silence. Approval. The barkeep announces, arms wide. Cheers go up. It continues like this through the week. Some stops are uneventful, just sniff, slurp, sit. Others, not so much. At the Thirsty Gull, Speculas sniffs the cask, sneezes twice, then growls low. The crowd gasps. The brewer stammers something about experimental yeast. The keg is rolled out, replaced without debate. The brewer swears to do better next week, Inspector. By now, townsfolk are gathering to watch inspections. It becomes a thing. Wednesday walks with the overseer. Vendors follow, selling bread, boiled eggs, and tiny plush dog with red sashes. Children mimic Speculas' reactions, practicing their serious bark and noble tail wag. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even before modern health codes, many European towns had food and drink inspection rules baked into civic tradition. Inspectors were often volunteers or semi-formal appointees, especially in places without centralized regulation. But never before had one been so enthusiastically canine. And then at the Silver Foam, Something unexpected happens. Speculoos refuses to enter. He sits outside the door, head tilted, tail completely still. People whisper. Is he tired? Bored? No, he's protesting. Word spreads like spilled ale. Speculoos won't go in. The tavern owner turns pale. The reason? Later uncovered. The owner had reused stale hops and hoped no one would notice. No one human. Anyway, Speculoos becomes a symbol, not just a quality, but of accountability. For the first time in years, the Guild of Brewers calls a public forum. They invite Speculoos, well, his handlers, to join. At the meeting, it's agreed beer standards will be formalized. Recipes must be documented. Barrel storage cleaned. And most importantly, inspections will continue, canine or not. Historians still argue whether the reforms were driven by fear of embarrassment or genuine respect for Speculoos' judgment. But the outcome? Harlingen's beer quality skyrockets. Tavern rankings become a new sport. Speculoos approved, signs appear in windows, carved into wood, painted on doors, even stitched into aprons. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. One tavern owner commissions a portrait of the dog, mid-sniff, wearing a powdered wig and ruffled collar. It hangs above the bar to this day, labeled, The Real Judge. You watch as Speculoos finishes his route for the day. His paws muddy, his whiskers damp with dew. He's slower now, a little tired. But every time he hears a cork pop, his ears perk up like a hound born to do this one sacred task. Back in the square, children run ahead, chanting, All hail the beer dog. A band tries, unsuccessfully, to play a triumphant march in his honor, though it sounds suspiciously like the tune from a laundry soap jingle. No one cares. Everyone's smiling. The mayor, meanwhile, is noticeably quiet, not out of jealousy yet, but because there's a growing realization that the dog now holds more moral authority than anyone in office. People listen to Speculoos. They trust him, and they like him a lot more than the guy who raised property taxes to fix a single bridge. As the stars come out and the last lanterns flicker, you sit on a bench near the docks, the cold wood creaking beneath you. Speculoos curls beside your feet, resting his head on your boot. You scratch behind his ears. He lets out a low, happy sigh, the kind of sound that says, Good beer, good town, good day. Tomorrow brings another round of taps and tails. But for now, it's enough to know that one dog, armed with nothing but a nose and some very strong opinions, has already started changing everything. You wait to find a crowd gathering in the square again, but today there's a strange reverence in the air, not the carnival buzz of an election or the cozy chatter of morning drinkers. No, today feels ceremonial. Speculoos is about to be sworn in. It's the kind of event that should be utterly ridiculous, except it isn't. The town has committed wholeheartedly to their canine inspector. They built a little stage in front of the town hall, decorated with hops and barley bundles, and there's even a freshly polished keg sitting in place of a podium. You push through the sea of onlookers. There's a woman handing out miniature cookies shaped like bones. Someone else has made paper hats with floppy ears. A group of teenagers stands nearby, holding up a banner that reads, In Dogs We Trust. And there he is, Speculoos, standing tall on a hay bale, his fur brushed to a sheen, wearing a brand new red sash that reads Bierkermeister in elegant gold stitching. It drapes awkwardly over his shoulder like he's a sleepy Roman senator. The mayor, finally leaning into the madness, steps forward holding a parchment scroll. People of Harlingen, he begins, trying to sound serious despite the sausage garland someone's hung around the podium. We are gathered here today to officially recognize our newest public servant, faithful, impartial, and very fluffy. Laughter ripples through the crowd, but the mayor presses on. This dog has done more to restore trust in our beer than any man in this council, myself included. And so, by the powers vested in me by the increasingly flexible town charter, he turns to Speculoos. Do you, Speculoos, swear to inspect with honesty, to bark only when necessary, and to chase down corruption wherever hides? Speculoos sits. The mayor beams. Then by unanimous will of the people, we welcome you as our beer quality overseer. There's applause. Bells ring. A child in the front row bursts into tears. probably overwhelmed by the cuteness or possibly just really into civic tradition. Then comes the gift presentation. The council has commissioned an official ledger, stamped with a paw print and bound in leather. Obviously, speculators can't write in it, but it will be maintained on his behalf by the wagging committee, which now include a rotating team of scribe, handlers, and one incredibly enthusiastic local librarian. The mayor also hands over a ceremonial bone. Not just any bone, a polished cow femur mounted on a little wooden plaque, engraved with the words, "For service in pursuit of ale integrity." And here's your mainstream historical fact. Civic titles like beer taster or ale conner existed as far back as medieval England. These were real jobs, sworn positions in towns and villages, meant to protect the people from spoiled or adulterated alcohol. Inspectors were expected to taste the beer and make public pronouncements about its quality. In some towns, they even wore special robes and carried silver tasting cups. So in a way, Harlingen was just continuing an old tradition with fluffier personnel. After the formalities, the procession begins. Speculators leads a crowd through town, stopping at each tavern for a sip or at least a sniff, and receiving treats in return. In some spots, bands play. In others, people simply bow or raise a glass. One pub, the Hopped Whale, fires a small cannon loaded with confetti in his honor. It's all becoming very real very quickly, and that's when things start to get complicated. You notice at one tavern, the Dockside Drop hasn't opened its doors, curtains drawn, no lanterns, and no welcome for the inspector. People murmur. The crowd slows. Speculators pads up to the front door and sniffs. He gives a single short bark. The owner opens the door a crack. He looks like he hasn't slept in days. We're, closed for cleaning. Later that day, the council receives an anonymous report. Expired malt, poor sanitation, and unpleasant floaty things in the cellar brew tanks. The Dockside Drop is fined. The tavern closes for renovations. Speculators' reputation as incorruptible begins to solidify. And here's your quirky tidbit. A local artisan starts making tiny replica ledgers with blank pages and paw-embossed covers. People use them to record beer ratings, pub visits, or just random thoughts. It sparks a brief but intense trend called dog journaling, which, for a brief time, outsells religious pamphlets in the local bookshop. Back at the council chambers, things get more official by the day. The beer ledger, dubbed the Sniff Register, begins to fill with entries like approved, crisp balanced, no off smell, inspector wagged, rejected, sour, cloudy, barked twice, brewery warned, mixed response, possibly due to loud flute music during tasting. Speculators, though clearly unaware of bureaucracy, adapt surprisingly well to his duties. His handlers learn his signals. A wag equals good. Tail droop equals mediocre. Growl equals unacceptable. Bark equals emergency. Peeing on the door equals well. You probably shouldn't be selling that stuff anyway. Historians still argue whether the town truly believed the dog could inspect beer with objective skill, or if it was a collective fantasy of a community desperate for something, anything honest. But what they can't deny is the impact. Beer standards rose. Trust returned. And people started talking again about quality, about craft, about pride. As night falls, you find yourself seated in a corner booth at the Wet Compass, a newly reformed tavern eager to earn that speculative seal of approval. The barkeep pours a rich, amber ale and smiles. Made with care, just like old times. Speculators trots in a moment later. He sniffs the air, steps up to the keg, gives it a long, thoughtful sniff, then curls up by the fireplace. Approval granted. And just like that, another tavern breathes a sigh of relief. The fire crackles. Glasses clink. You sip your ale. And for the first time in ages, it tastes like a town that remembered who it was. The wind shifts inland, carrying the scent of roasted barley and smoke through the narrow streets of Harlingen. You pull your scarf a little tighter, though the bite in the air is more bracing than cruel. It's beer weather, the kind that wraps around you like an old blanket, hinting at stories, laughter, and maybe a pint or three. You're not alone. Speculators trots ahead, tail high, ears perked, with a small crowd trailing behind like the most whimsical municipal parade imaginable. This is his new routine, the weekly pub crawl. Only this one's not for pleasure. It's inspection, oversight, justice, if you believe the pamphlets. The Paw Protocol, as it's come to be known, governs these walks now. It's not written law. Exactly. More a collection of rules shaped by behavior, observation, and, apparently, snack negotiations. You join the procession at the Winking Sailor, a centuries-old tavern with sea-worn beams and a cat that claims the bar stools between noon and dusk. The moment Speculoos enters, the place straightens up like a teenager whose crush just walked in. The barkeep quickly wipes down the tap handles, gestures reverently toward the new batch of winter ale, and steps back. Speculoos approaches the keg like an artist critiquing a canvas. He sniffs, pauses, sniffs again. Then, yes, there it is, a tiny lick at the base of the tap. He turns, sits, and flops his tail twice. The barkeep exhales audibly. Tail double flop. That's a first. Someone scribbles it in a notebook. From there, you wind through 4 more pubs. The Rusty Net, which passes with a single approving huff. The Foamy Anchor, which receives no bark, but an extended paw lift that has since been interpreted as conditionally drinkable. And then there's a Drown Bell, a newer spot pushing experimental brews aged in salt brine barrels. Speculoos licks the rim, frowns, yes, somehow visibly frowns, and refuses to enter the back tasting room. They get a warning. The message is clear. Innovation is fine, but don't get weird just for weird's sake. Here's your mainstream historical fact of the night. In many parts of Europe, beer quality used to be enforced not only through laws but through community rituals. In some towns, barrels were tasted in public, and bad brews were dumped into the streets as a warning. Public shame wasn't just a deterrent. It was tradition. And now, in Harlingen, it's a tradition revived with Shaggy Enforcer leading the charge. The beauty of the system isn't just the inspection, it's the culture it's building. Breweries now host pre-paw events where townsfolk can preview new beers before the inspector's arrival. There are tastings, feedback cards, and debates like, do Speculoos prefer nutty brown Alish or citrusy saisons? And here's your quirky tidbit. One tavern owner swears he saw Speculoos sneeze 3 times at a keg of mint-infused porter, then dig a shallow hole in front of it as if trying to bury the evidence. The keg was never tapped. Back in the square, the Wagging Committee has set up a public ledger board. It lists all the town's establishments and their current paw ratings. Think Michelin stars, but fluffier. 3 paws, exceptional quality, loyal following, smells that make the inspector drool. 2 paws, solid brews, clean taps, good snacks. 1 paw, acceptable, but watch yourself next week. No paw, under review. Shape up or face the bark. It's equal parts silly and serious. And it works. The ratings are updated weekly, drawing attention from across the province. Tourists arrive not to visit museums or take boat tours, but to follow the dog. They ask which taverns pass inspection. They want the full Speculoos experience. Local shops now sell guided beer maps with paw symbols marking routes. Someone's printing shirts that say sniffed and approved. It's economic revival through canine charm, and even the skeptical guild of brewers is coming around. They've sent emissaries from other towns, curious to learn how Harlingen cleaned up its beer scene using little more than a wag and a bark. Historians still argue whether the whole thing was a form of performance art or genuine public policy. There are conflicting theories. One scholar claims it was a subconscious rebellion against industrialized brewing. Another suggests it was simply a case of communal whimsy getting out of hand. Yet, both agree Harlingen's beer had never been better. And in case you're wondering, yes, Speculoos still acts like it's all no big deal. At the Drunken Gull, after a full day of inspections, he pads behind the bar, curls up beside a stack of coasters, and snores with the slow rhythm of a lighthouse bell. You sip your ale, crisp, balanced, and very clearly fresh, and listen to the laughter of a town that's learned how to trust again. And that trust? It didn't come from law or punishment. It came from ritual, from someone or something people could believe in. You take a long sip and look around. A hand-painted sign above the bar catches your eye. It's new, under the watchful nose of Harlingen's finest. Below it, a small plaque. Speculoos slept here. You smile, because of course he did. And you're lucky to have been there when he did. By now, the tale of Harlingen's beer inspecting dog has leaked beyond the harbor. It starts as a funny line in a traveling merchant's journal, then a bar song in the neighboring village of Franeker, then a feature story in a weekly circular called Curious Matters from the Provinces, which, despite sounding like an insult, boasts over 4,000 subscribers across the Netherlands. And just like that, the town changes. It starts subtly. A few curious visitors, sailors looking for a pint and a peek at the fabled Speculoos. Then, merchants from larger cities arrive, politely inquire where they might observe an inspection. By the end of the month, there are full wagons of tourists, some with sketchbooks, others with actual printed maps labeled the Speculoos Trail. You see it yourself as you walk the square. Shops now sell beer mugs etched with paw prints. A local potter makes ceramic tankards shaped like dogs with their tongues out, charmingly hideous, somehow irresistible. There are woven coasters with approved by Inspector Speculoos in careful, looped embroidery. And outside each tavern, a painted board tracking their current paw rating, refreshed weekly in chalk by a teenager who may be angling for sainthood. Speculoos, of course, remains gloriously indifferent. He continues his inspections, tail wagging, ears twitching, and tongue slightly lolling to his mouth as he sniffs his way through town. You swear he's got a sixth sense for which barrels are fresh and which are just pretending. And now, wherever he goes, people follow. He walks, and the town follows, an accidental parade led by a dog with a purpose. And here's your mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, the Netherlands was becoming increasingly connected. Newspapers were more accessible. Trade routes were booming. Word of mouth traveled faster than ever, especially in port towns like Harlingen. So when people heard about a dog upholding ale standards, it wasn't just a local oddity. It became part of the national conversation about civic pride, authenticity, and just possibly beer purity laws. The town leans in hard. Weekly guided tours are launched through the eyes of Speculoos, even though, ironically, the dog's main inspection organ is his nose. Taverns coordinate special pup pints, limited edition brews named after the canine inspector. You try a few. Tail Chaser Triple. Strong and spicy, brewed to make your tail spin. Snoot Snuffless' own. Light, crisp herbal, allegedly inspired by the thyme plant Speculoos once rolled in. The Bark. Dark as a stormy night, with smoky notes and a slap of bitterness. Not for the faint of heart. Even the skeptical older folks started enjoying the transformation. The local bookkeeper, who hadn't smiled since the Napoleonic Wars, now chuckles as he tallies up sales from souvenir paw-printed bottle openers. But, of course, fame is a double-edged bone. You overhear murmurs, quiet ones at first, concerns that the whole thing might go too far, that tourism could overshadow tradition, that maybe, just maybe, they're building an empire on the back of a sleepy, slightly overweight harbor dog. Historians still argue whether the commercialization of Speculoos was a natural result of a town seizing its moment, or the first hint of selling out. Some argue the town protected its values. Others say it commodified its conscience. The truth, like a sour lambic, is somewhere in between, but Harlingen doesn't slow down. There's talk now of creating an Inspector's Festival, a weekend-long celebration of beer, dogs, and community. The council debates how to structure it. Should there be a parade? A brew competition? A canine look-alike contest? All three? In the middle of this planning chaos, a traveling brewer from Belgium arrives. He presents Speculoos with a medal, not for service, per se, but for outstanding contribution to the preservation of beer dignity. It's an awkwardly large thing, cast in bronze and shaped like a pint glass with wings. The dog tries to chew it. And here's your quirky tidbit. A French wine merchant, hoping to capitalize on the buzz, attempts to install a cat as a wine inspector in his village. The cat climbs into a barrel and refuses to come out for 3 days. The experiment is never repeated. Back in Harlingen, a small museum exhibit opens in the town library. It's called Ale and Tale, the Specula's Archives. It includes the original voting scroll, his ceremonial bone, and a collection of sketches and poems written by children inspired by the hero of hops. And that's when you realize something. This isn't just about beer anymore. It's about identity, about community. The story of Speculas has become a shorthand for everything the town wants to believe about itself. Honest, quirky, close-knit, proud. Even the local school gets involved. There's a new civics lesson titled How to Bark at Bad Government, using Speculas as a case study in watchdog leadership. Students write pretend laws in his honor. The best one? All public officials must be able to tell the difference between good beer and old soup. As for Speculas, he continues his duties with charming consistency. Still sniffs, still wags, still flops over dramatically whenever someone tries to take an official photo. He's been sketched, painted, even embroidered into a church kneeler cushion. A visiting poet writes an ode titled, To the Dog Who Sniffed Out Truth. You sip your evening ale at the Leaping Minnow, watching as the inspector curls beside the hearth, snoring gently. His ledger lies nearby, updated and organized by two teenage girls who take their job very seriously. A drunk sailor raises his mug toward the fireplace and whispers, To the dog who saved the drink. And the room, without prompting, echoes softly, To the dog. The town of Harlingen is basking in its newfound fame. The streets are brighter, the beer is better, and even the gulls seem less aggressive these days, though that might just be coincidence. But beneath the foam and festivities, something's brewing that smells less like barley and more like tension. It begins with a letter. You find it pinned to the door of the council hall one misty morning, written on thick parchment in the florid script of someone who takes themselves very seriously. The wax seal is unfamiliar, an old monastery crest, featuring a barley stalk wrapped around a crucifix. The letter is from the Brothers of St. Audemars, a monastic order from just outside town, famous for their centuries-old brewing tradition. Their beer, Sanctus Dubel, is rich, earthy, and said to have healing properties, though that's mostly due to high alcohol content and not actual miracles. They've sold to Harlingen for generations. Quietly, respectfully, until now, the letter reads in part, We object, on spiritual and procedural grounds, to having our sacred brew subjected to the olfactory judgment of a beast. Our practices predate your dog, and indeed most of your taverns. You raise an eyebrow. The townsfolk, overhearing, raise much more than that. The council is put in a tough spot. The monastery's beer is beloved. It sells well. It's tradition. But denying inspection would undermine Speculas' role. And denying him? That's political suicide. And so, a compromise is proposed, a public tasting. Speculas will inspect the monastery Sanctus Dubel in a formal ceremony, witnessed by both the wagging committee and a delegation from the monastery. If the beer passes, it earns the paw of approval. If not, well, no one really knows, because no one expects it to fail. You're there on the day of the tasting. The town square is transformed. Benches are set. The monastery brings a hand-carved barrel adorned with saints and vines. A monk named Brother Eurus arrives with a slow blink and a face like someone who hasn't enjoyed anything since the Treaty of Vienna. He carries a silver ladle, and he's not smiling. The townspeople, on the other hand, treat the whole thing like a circus. One group sells holy hops buttons. Another sets up a stand with mock confessions. Forgive me, brother, I drank stale ale. And in the center of it all, Speculas arrives, escorted like royalty, wearing a new sash that reads, Inspector Generales. The Latin was a last-minute touch, presumably to impress the monks. The tasting begins. Brother Eurus solemnly draws a pour from the barrel. He hands it carefully to the dog's handler. Speculas is placed before it. The town holds its breath. He sniffs, pauses, sniffs again. Then he barks. Just once, loud and clear. Brother Eurus goes pale. The handler leans down, whispers something, then looks up. That's his off bark. The crowd murmurs. Someone faints, or pretends to for drama. A second handler steps in to confirm. He only does that for contaminated casks. The last time was at the dockside drop. The monks are incensed. They argue. Surely the dog is mistaken. Surely this must be a jest. But then someone from the crowd speaks up, a brewer's apprentice who once trained under a former monk. There's been a problem with their winter batch. He says, too much residual sugar. Over-fermentation. It's been a rumor for weeks. Silence falls. Specular sniffs the tank again. Growls this time. Low. Final. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Monasteries were once the standard bearers of European brewing. They invented methods, maintained traditions, and even pioneered early sanitation. But by the 1800s, many were facing pressure from secular competition and were notoriously resistant to scrutiny. Some refused to modernize. Others simply relied on reputation rather than inspection. Harlingen, apparently, will not let that slide. The council, nervous but resolute, makes its ruling. Until the brew is reformulated and retested, the Sanctus Dumbbell cannot carry the inspector's paw. The monks leave in a huff. Brother Eurus mutters something about dogs not being mentioned in canon law. The townspeople, meanwhile, rally around speculas. That night, at the Bitter Knot, you find yourself among a raucous crowd toasting the inspector's courage. He sniffed out sin, someone shouts. Blessed be the bark. And here's your quirky tidbit. That very evening, a group of artists begins work on a stained glass window for the town church. It depicts speculas, haloed in hops, standing before a barrel as light shines on his noble snoot. The priest, unsure whether to be amused or offended, says only as long as it's in the vestibule. But not everything is jubilant. The monastery's rejection stirs conversation. Could this dog now dictate centuries of tradition? Is beer quality enough to override heritage? The debate spills into taverns and living rooms. The council receives letters, some in praise, others in protest. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the tipping point, when speculas shifted from mascot to movement, whether Harlingen's beer renaissance was born from inspection or from rebellion against status and ceremony. But either way, there's no going back. The next morning, a note arrives, not from the monastery, from a village up the coast. It reads, "We hear your inspector works miracles. Would he consider visiting our taverns as well?" You look down at speculas, snoozing in the sunlight, belly gently rising and falling. A hero, a critic, a cultural revolution in fur. And across town, brewers begin their day with purpose, measuring, testing, sniffing twice. Because if a dog can do it, so can they. The invitation arrives in a box of pickled herring. You're at the docks when the delivery boy waddles up, red-faced from the cold, thrusting a wooden crate into your hands. Inside, a linen-wrapped note, a small keg of amber ale, and a neatly printed card from the mayor of Pingjum, the next village over. With respect and admiration for Harlingen's innovative practices, we humbly request the temporary services of your beer inspector. A fair exchange of pints and prestige may follow. You look down at Speculas, who is currently attempting to intimidate a seagull by making direct, slow eye contact. He does not acknowledge the letter. He is busy, but the town does, because this is no small matter. Pingjum has long harbored quiet contempt for Harlingen. Known for its tight streets and notoriously snooty cider, Pingjum considers itself more refined, if less fun. The fact that they're asking for help, especially dog help, is either an olive branch or a trap. Speculas accepts, of course, or at least doesn't object when his handlers begin packing snacks and a fresh sash. The journey begins with a modest procession. 2 carts, a small escort of Harlingen's finest tavern musicians, and one dog who insists on riding up front like Napoleon. You travel slowly along the winding coastal path, through salt-bitten trees and stone bridges older than most nations. In Pingjum, the reception is cautious. Their mayor, a lean man named Diedrich with a face like a wet candle, greets you with 4 smiles and a barrel of their finest heritage ale. He introduces the local brewers, all of whom wear aprons with stitched initials and expressions of mild panic. We heard the inspector prefers strong malt profiles. One whispers, "Is it okay with fruit notes?" The inspection begins at the Golden Orchard, Pingjum's oldest tavern and proudest producer of apple-blended ale. Speculoos enters with his usual flair, sniffs the bar, and approaches the cask. He sniffs once, blinks, then, pause for suspense, licks a tap. Approval granted. Barely. The room exhales. But the next stop, the Red Bell, isn't so lucky. Speculoos approaches, tail twitching. He sniffs the keg, pulls back, then barks. Loud and sudden. The brewer protests. It's a traditional recipe, unfiltered, rustic. But the bark remains. The cask is tested later and found to be full of fermentation errors. Harlingen's methods strike again. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Beer rivalry between towns wasn't unusual in Europe. Styles, methods, and regional pride often clashed, sometimes comically, sometimes violently. In the 14th century, the city of Bremen even went to war over beer taxes. So the idea of a symbolic envoy, even a canine one, wasn't as silly as it sounds. It was diplomacy. Infer. By day 3, Pingjum has become a Speculoos convert. He's featured in the local paper. Children draw his portrait. The mayor even admits, somewhat begrudgingly, that Harlingen's ale has improved immeasurably since appointing the inspector. Still, not everyone is thrilled. One Pingjum brewer, frustrated by the attention, offers Speculoos a bowl of ale laced with duck liver, his favorite treat. The town gasps. The inspector sniffs the bowl, blinks, and walks away. A clear refusal. The brewer is fined for attempted bribery. Pingjum's papers call it the Sausage Gate Incident. Speculoos' moral standing climbs to celestial levels. And here's your quirky tidbit. An enterprising teenager starts selling candles shaped like barrels with little dogs on top, nose forward, paw raised in judgment. The slogan? Sniff the truth. They sell out within 2 days. The visit ends with a joint ceremony. Harlingen and Pingjum sign a Beerwick-Hond Accord, the Beer Watchdog Agreement. It establishes inter-town inspection opportunities and allows Speculoos to appoint honorary deputies, humans sadly, to enforce cleanliness and quality across the region. You return to Harlingen with gifts, new casks, fancy glassware, and a fresh title printed on the inspector's growing collection of sashes. Regional Overseer of Beer Matters. Historians still argue whether this was when Speculoos transitioned from local legend to regional authority. Some frame it as the beginning of the paw diplomacy era. Others think it was just a really good excuse to throw a beer festival every time he left town. But the results are clear. Neighboring towns take notice. Quality improves. Breweries once too proud to change begin scrubbing tanks, testing batches, and, dare we say it, sniffing their own barrels before calling a brew complete. Back home, Speculoos is greeted like a king returning from battle. The square is packed. Banners fly. Someone even builds a papier-mâché float shaped like a giant paw smashing a sour keg. It's both terrifying and adorable. That night, you sit beside the hearth of the Dog's Honor, a new tavern opened by 2 former skeptics who now describe themselves as disciples of the bark. They serve a rich, creamy stout called Loyal Nose, brewed in tribute. Speculoos sleeps beside you, snoring gently, his sash crumpled and slightly damp from cider spills. His ledger is open nearby, with a fresh entry that simply reads, Pingjum, barked once, trusted now. You sip your ale and smile, because somehow a single dog has managed to do what years of counsel, fines, and regulations never could. He sniffed, he barked, and people listened. It's supposed to be a quiet morning. You're sipping coffee, watching the harbor fog slide across the rooftops like a cat that owns the place, when someone bursts into the tavern, breathless, scarf flapping, cheeks red from both wind and panic. They're petitioning to make him mayor. You nearly choke. The barkeep snorts. What, the dog? Yes, the dog. Within the hour, the rumor is confirmed. A group of townsfolk, half in jest and half in dead seriousness, have submitted a motion to the Harlingen Town Council that Speculoos, beloved beer inspector and symbol of incorruptibility, be considered for honorary mayoral status. Not just a mascot, not just a sniffing savant, but Mayor Speculoos, overseer of beers and bureaucracy. You step out into the square, heart thudding with the kind of ridiculous excitement that only a truly chaotic civic development can bring. And sure enough, pinned beside the council notices and weather report is a parchment headed with nomination of K9 for ceremonial leadership. There are over 200 signatures, fishermen, bakers, librarians, even a few council clerks. It starts as a laugh, then a slogan. He's never lied. He's never taxed us. He never even howls at night. Within a day, signs appear in tavern windows. Speculous for mayor, he knows what stinks. Honesty, loyalty, and better beer. He's already got the sash. The human mayor, Arend de Vries, is less thrilled. A thin, balding man known for his love of parliamentary procedure and beige waistcoats. Arend has been in office for nearly a decade. He prides himself on competence. But charisma? Not exactly his strong suit. You spot him outside the council chambers, pale and visibly sweating. It's a joke, he mutters. A farce. Surely no one seriously suggesting. I mean a dog? Oh, they are. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Ceremonial animals in political roles aren't new. In 1938, a dog named Bosco Ramos was elected honorary mayor of Sonoma, California. And in Alaska, a cat named Stubbs held an unofficial mayoral position in Talkeetna for 20 years. These roles were symbolic, but in small communities, symbols matter deeply. They say something about what people value, about who they trust. Harlingen, it seems, values honesty, charm, and a complete inability to sign sneaky tax documents. The council meets in emergency session. Arguments fly. Some say this is a mockery of government. Others counter that maybe it's time government learned to laugh and listen. A compromise is offered. Speculous could be granted the ceremonial title honorary mayor morale, a figurehead role with no actual power. But the people want more. They want the sash, the statue, the official bark before festivals. They want the dog at the ribbon cuttings, the town report signed with paw prints, the mayoral biscuit fund written into the budget. And here's your quirky tidbit. A group of local teenagers start sewing Mayor Specula's capes for cats, ferrets, and one extremely patient goat. It becomes a short-lived fashion movement called civic pet wear. Back at the tavern, debate boils over pints. He brought us together, says a schoolteacher, cheeks flushed from her third ale. He deserves the title. He can't read, let alone legislate, argues a former alderman. Yeah, and Arend can read just fine and still missed the mold scandal last year. Someone fires back. Speculas, meanwhile, is asleep under a bench, paw twitching in some happy dream of barrels and sunbeams. You can't help but wonder, is this town going mad, or has it finally remembered how to lead with joy? Historians still argue whether the movement for Speculus's mayoralty was a sincere call for reform or an elaborate social satire. Some call it the political awakening. Others see it as a natural evolution of a community craving transparency, and accidentally discovering that barking at corruption is surprisingly effective. Eventually, Mayor Arend calls a public address. He steps onto the town hall steps, papers shaking slightly in his hand, and says, "Though I appreciate the humor and affection behind this motion, the office of mayor requires duties that no dog, however beloved, can fulfill." A pause. Boos. Shouts of "He fulfills our hearts." Arend gulps and continues. That said, let us honor him as we would a founding figure, a folk hero and a moral compass. Therefore, I propose a new title, Patron of the People, and I will gladly share every public appearance with him. He can stand, well, sit beside me as the face of Harlingen. It's not exactly a concession, but it works. The town erupts in cheers. The next morning, Speculus is fitted for a tiny tricorn hat, purely ceremonial. He wears it once, then eats it. A backup is sewn with reinforced brim. And here's the kicker. The town erects a small mayoral desk for him in the council hall. It has a nameplate, a snack drawer, and a tiny gavel he once accidentally knocked onto the floor during a budget discussion. It is said that from that day forward, no major vote is taken without a glance in his direction. That night, you sip a warm brew under the stars as the town bells chime soft and low. Speculus lies at your feet, tail thumping gently. Across the square, his statue, half finished, gloriously lopsided, gleams in the moonlight. Mayor or not, The town belongs to him now, not by law, but by love. And honestly, that's better. You could smell the cellar before you saw it. A thick, musty air like damp oats and dishonesty wafts up from the basement of the staggering Pilchard, one of the oldest taverns in Harlingen. It had always been just a little off. The kind of place where the windows were foggy even in summer, and the stew came with a side of suspicion. But no one had expected this. It all started when speculators refused to go down the stairs. The tavern owner, a barrel-chested man named Don with permanently grease-stained sleeves, had tried to coax the inspector down with treats. He'd offered cured sausage, lamb scraps, even a fresh herring. But speculators stood his ground, ears forward, nose twitching, one paw lifted in what now, thanks to weeks of practice and observation, was universally known as a suspicion stance. The wagging committee was alerted immediately. By evening, the council had been summoned. A few brave volunteers descended into the dark with lanterns and cloths over their noses. You followed, your boots echoing on the stairs as the scent intensified, rotten grain mold, and something faintly metallic. The truth came out by torchlight. Dozens of barrels, stashed behind old sacks of barley. Illegally sourced ale, siphoned from failed batches, watered down and mixed with artificial sweeteners. Bottles with forged labels, some bearing the speculators-approved paw mark crudely hand-painted. Don protested, said it was leftover stock, said it wasn't for sale, said it was for personal research. And then someone opened a barrel and found a floating chew toy. Unchud, bribery. The town was furious. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 1800s, beer fraud was rampant across Europe. Brewers would use everything from tobacco to improve flavor and appearance. In some towns, entire batches were condemned and publicly dumped in the street. Trust in taverns was always fragile, and once lost, it could take years to rebuild. Harlingen didn't wait years. The council shut down the staggering Pilchard immediately. Don was fined, his brewing license revoked, and his speculators' mugs confiscated and smashed in the square as a warning. The crowd cheered, and not one person offered to help him carry out the remaining barrels. And here's your quirky tidbit. The chew toy found in the barrel? It was traced back to a gift shop down the coast. When asked why they stocked so many identical ones, the clerk shrugged and said, "We heard Harlingen's dog was into politics now. Thought we'd get ahead of the trend." The scandal ripples through town like a dropped pint glass in a silent room. People are shaken. If someone could forge the inspector's approval, what else could be faked? The council meets again to draft new rules. Official paw stamp seals must now be applied under witness. Only a designated clerk may log approval. The ledger must be verified weekly by the library's notary, a woman named Bridget who takes joyless precision to heroic levels. Speculators, for his part, seemed completely unfazed. He still makes his rounds, still sniffs with gravitas. But from that day on, his pauses are longer. His ears twitch more. He starts rejecting more barrels than before. Not many, just enough to suggest his nose is no longer given the benefit of the doubt. You follow him through the streets that week. People whisper as he passes, not in fear, but in renewed reverence, as if they've just been reminded that this isn't all just charming pageantry. There's real risk here, real failure, real corruption, but also real consequences. The brewery 2 doors down from the Pilcher begins offering free public tours. Another posts every ingredient used in their brews on a board by the door. At the boiled barrel, the owner invites townsfolk to taste each batch before release. "If you don't trust me, at least trust a dog," she says. He's never had an off day. Historians still argue whether the scandal marked the peak or the pivot of the speculators' era. Some say it proved the system worked. Others claim it showed how easy it was to game affection. Either way, it solidified something important. Speculators wasn't just a mascot. He was an institution. And institutions attract imitators and enemies. The final touch? The council installs a commemorative plaque outside the Pilchard's door. Here was exposed the first attempt to bribe the inspector. "May your taps run honest." It's etched with a paw print. Below that, a small relief carving of a chew toy. You spend the evening at the Honest Tankard, sipping a rich stout called Integrity Black. Around you, people share the story again and again. How the dog knew, how the town listened, how no human would have noticed. And Speculoos? He lies under the table, paws twitching in his sleep, dreaming, perhaps, of justice. Or sausages. Probably both. You'd think, by now, everyone would be on board. You'd think the sight of Speculoos on his rounds, nose of the breeze, ears tuned like satellite dishes, would inspire nothing but confidence. Joy, even. But lately, not everyone's laughing. At first, there's a few grumbles. A letter to the local paper sign concerned taxpayer, questioning whether public resources should support a canine whose main contribution is, quote, sniffing things and falling asleep under tables. Then a pamphlet shows up, anonymously distributed in door frames and under tankards. Governance or gimmick? A serious town deserves serious oversight. The title alone is enough to raise eyebrows. The contents? Surprisingly sharp. It points out that Speculoos has no formal training, that his approvals are subjective, that human brewers live in fear of one misplaced bark, and perhaps most stingingly, have we built a culture of fear around a dog's nostrils? You'd be tempted to laugh, except it starts working. Some tavern owners begin asking for second inspections. Others complain that the inspector favors certain breweries. A minor scandal erupts when two brewers get into a shouting match over what Speculoos' tail flick at exactly 3:17 p.m. meant. Was it a passing gnat? A sign of mild displeasure? Divine judgment? You visit the town archive, where a new file has been opened. Canine Oversight Review. It's not a repeal. Not yet, but it's a tremor. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Even the most beloved folk systems eventually face institutional pushback. From medieval guilds to early cooperatives, informal oversight often clashed with formal governance. The more symbolic power something has, the more threatening it becomes to those used to pulling levers behind closed doors. That week, a traveling historian from Utrecht arrives, Dr. Henrik Lydecker, full of theories and academic smugness. He hosts a talk in the square, what we talk about when we talk about dogs and power. He calls Speculoos a symptom of populist fantasy, says Harlingen is using an animal to avoid the real work of reform. Suggests the town has confused cuteness with accountability. The reaction? Mixed. Some clap politely. Others jeer. One child pelts him with a stale biscuit. But the idea takes root. Was this all just a shared delusion? A charming stunt that became a crutch? Speculoos, of course, knows none of this. Or maybe he does. You spot him on his rounds that evening, moving slower than usual. He lingers longer at kegs. He pauses at each tavern door, as if taking in the mood before stepping over the threshold. At the Parched Herring, he sniffs the cask, then walks away. No bark, no growl, just silence. The tavern owner panics. Was that worse than a bark? He whispers. Meanwhile, the council calls for a hearing. They want to reevaluate Speculoos' role. Not to remove him, they claim, just to make sure the system is sound. The phrase echoes down the alleys. The system is sound. Like something sharp pretending to be soft. And here's your quirky tidbit. An impromptu free the dog rally springs up in the square. Dozens of people wear floppy ear hats. They sing Who's a Good Inspector? To the tune of the national anthem. Someone even brings a goat in protest, holding a sign that reads, Don't let this happen to democracy. Speculoos doesn't attend. He's sleeping through most of it under the Brewing Guild's porch. But the hearing looms. In the council chamber, tension hangs like heavy foam. Arguments fly. He's not trained. He's never failed us. It's unprofessional. It's perfect because it's unprofessional. Some propose limiting his duties, only inspecting special brews, or appearing purely at ceremonial events. Others demand the full removal of his ledger from official records. It makes us look foolish, one councilman grumbles. But then comes Marta, a retired tavern owner with eyes like cracked walnut shells. She rises from her chair and, with a voice low and steady, tells a story. 2 years ago, I served a batch I thought was fine. No mold, good fermentation. But Specula sniffed, barked, and walked out. I was furious, humiliated, but I checked the keg anyway. She pauses. Dead rat, lodged in the tap. Could have poisoned half the town. That dog saved us. That's not politics. That's trust. Silence. And then, from the back of the room, a familiar sound. A soft thump. Specula's, who wandered in some time during the speech, lies near the fireplace. Tail thumping. Once. Twice. The motion to reduce his roll fails. And yet, the cracks remain. The trust is shaken not in him, but in each other. An illusion that something simple and pure can survive unchanged once the grown-ups start arguing over bylaws and reputation. Historians still argue whether this was the beginning of Specula's twilight, the moment when the myth became too big for the town to carry. Others say it was necessary growing pain, proof that the town was maturing, evolving beyond fairy tales. But that night, at the taproot, you sit with your pint and notice the hush that hangs just beneath the chatter. Everyone's a little quieter. Everyone's watching the door. And when it creaks open and a single wet paw pads in, the sigh of relief that rises isn't loud, but it's unmistakable. He's still here, still sniffing, still ours. The wind is sharp now, slicing off the North Sea and curling through the alleys like a rumor. Winter is in full swing. The air smells like wood smoke and wet wool. Most days you can see your breath, and lately you can see your doubt, too, hanging above Harlingen like frost that won't melt. Specula's is older. It's not dramatic, not sudden, just little things. His gait a little slower, his rounds a little shorter. He pauses more. Sometimes you see him looking, not sniffing, not searching, just looking, as if he's wondering when this town got so noisy. The wagging committee adjusts without complaint. They shorten the route, add extra breaks. One innkeeper starts keeping a little fleece blanket behind the bar, just in case the inspector needs a nap between casks. But everyone feels it, the shift, which is why, when word spreads that Specula's is planning one final full inspection, the town reacts like it's the end of something sacred. You can't walk a block without hearing it. He's doing the old route. The whole thing, even the hill. It's not about the beer anymore, it's goodbye. You wake early the day begins. The sun hasn't fully risen, just a pale smear across a sky the color of pewter. And there he is, Specula's, standing in the square, sash slightly faded, eyes a little cloudy, tail still ready. There's a hush as people gather. No trumpets, no declarations, just the sound of boots crunching frost, mug steaming in glove hands, and the slow, sure tap of the dog's paws on stone. He begins where it all started, the dry Flesson, the first pub to whisper the idea that maybe the dog knew more than the inspectors. The barkeep kneels, pours the first draw, and holds it up like an offering. Specula sniffs, wags once, then moves on. Next is a hop whale, now proudly bearing a 3-paw rating in a mural of Specula's sipping beer, inaccurate but charming. A child tries to hand him a cookie shaped like a tankard. He gently noses it back. You follow quietly, along with what must be half the town. No one speaks above a whisper. It's like watching a cathedral walk. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Farewell tours were common for public servants in 19th century Europe. Retiring officials would walk their old routes, say final hellos, receive tokens of gratitude. But Harlingen has turned this into something else. Half pilgrimage, half elegy. A town saying thank you to a dog who never asked for anything but a sniff and a warm place to sleep. By midday, the clouds thicken. Snow flurries drift down like slow applause. At the drown bell, the inspector takes his time, sniffs 3 separate barrels, pauses at one. He barks once. Everyone gasps. The barrel's removed, rolled out without a word. No one questions it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Someone has made tiny last-round commemorative flags, one for each tavern on the route. They're decorated with paw prints and little quotes like, "Never miss a sniff," and "The dog knew." One is simply a sketch of a nose with wings. At the top of the hill, overlooking the docks, Specula's pauses. It's the final stop. The Dog's Honor, a tavern renamed in his honor years ago. The wind is strong here. The kind that makes your eyes water, even when you're not feeling particularly sentimental. The barkeep is waiting outside, kettle in hand, cup steaming. Speculoos approaches the keg. Slowly, deliberately, he sniffs. Then, after a long pause, he sits. No bark, no growl, just stillness, approval. A wave of applause rolls down the hill. Gentle, slow, like a lullaby and claps. Someone begins to cry. It sets off 3 others. One burly fisherman just stares at his boots, blinking a little too often, and then Speculoos turns. He looks back over his shoulder, at the town, the sea, the faces, and then he trots, not walks, but trots, down the hill, back toward the square. He doesn't stop at the council hall. He doesn't lie beneath his usual bench. He heads for the harbor. The docks are quiet in winter. Just a few boats, gulls circling, ice forming in little crystalline shelves on the pilings. You follow at a distance, boots slipping on the wet planks. The sun has slipped lower now, spilling golden light over the slate roofs. Speculoos steps onto a coil of rope and curls up, nose to tail, just like he did before anyone knew his name. Before the votes, before the ledgers, before the legends. His eyes close, his tail tucks tight. The town stops moving. No one approaches. No one speaks. Someone lights a lantern. It flickers in the wind, like it's not quite ready to go out. And then, just for a second, you think he's asleep. But his breathing is too slow now, too still. He stays there as the sky turns lavender and the stars begin to blink above. Historians still argue whether that was his final moment, or if he got up later and wandered off quietly into some hidden nook of the harbor to dream uninterrupted. Some say he lived another year. Others claim they still saw him, tail flicking under the council bench, well after. But the town knows better. The square is silent that night. No music, no tavern songs, just one barrel, left untapped. A little plaque appears beside it the next morning. For Speculoos, Inspector, Mayor, Friend. And below it, just 3 words. No bark required. The snow falls gently now, the kind that hushes a town rather than buries it. Harlingen moves slower these days. The mugs are warmer, the laughter softer. There's a kind of reverence in the air, not sad. Exactly. More like the long, quiet breath after a story has ended, but before anyone dares to close the book. Speculoos is gone. Not officially, mind you. No one has said it out loud. But the signs are there. His spot under the bench remains undisturbed. The little mat outside the wet compass hasn't been stepped on in a week. The wagging committee is quietly disbanded, its members now tending to other duties, though you still see them walking the old inspection route, half out of habit, half in hope. But something remarkable happened in the wake of his final round. The beer stayed good. The taverns kept their standards. Brewers continued to clean their barrels with care, measure hops with precision, and write their recipes in neat, legible ink. They didn't slack off, didn't cut corners. If anything, they tried harder. And when asked why, they all say the same thing. He might come back. You sit at a window seat in the honest tankard, sipping a mild winter ale. Outside, the square is lit by lanterns, soft glows behind frosted glass. At the center, beneath the statue of a dog mid-sniff, slightly oversized snout, lovingly exaggerated, someone has placed a basket of bones. There are fresh flowers, too, notes tucked into the folds of his carved sash. One reads, "We still check the casks. Promise." The statue isn't the only monument. The council, after months of bickering and one very dramatic argument involving a broken mug, finally approved the creation of the Speculoos Standard, a formal code of brewing conduct, inspection protocol, and tavern hygiene that now governs every barrel in Harlingen. It's clear, fair, and regularly enforced, not by dogs anymore, but by people who remember what the bark meant. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Many modern quality standards in food and drink originated from local, even informal systems, community traditions that worked so well they were eventually codified. Harlingen's current brewing law cites canine precedent in 3 separate footnotes. It's legally bizarre, but no one questions it. You visit the town archive one afternoon. There's a small exhibit tucked between dusty naval records and census rolls. A simple table. On it, the original letter ledger, now encased in glass. Open to the last page. The ink is faded but readable. Final round. All casts passed. Tail wagged once at the dog's honor. Barked nowhere. The town as well. And here's your quirky tidbit. Every year, on the first snow after the solstice, the townspeople gather at dusk. They walk the old route. No inspection, no ceremony. Just lanterns, laughter, and the quiet sound of boots on cobblestones. They call it the Pauper Parade. At the end, they raise their glasses and whisper together, to the dog who taught us how to care. Back at the square, a new mural is being painted along the east wall of the council building. It's bold, bright, and absurdly charming. Speculas in a sash, surrounded by barrels and blossoms, perched like a saint atop the town. A child passes by and points, asking, "Did he really bark at a monk?" And an old brewer, leaning on her cane, nods. He did. Changed everything. You smile, because it's true. Speculas may be gone, but Harlingen didn't lose him. They absorbed him into their laws, their habits, their folklore, into the way they brew, the way they trust, the way they toast at every table. You finish your ale and step outside. The air smells like hops and home. There's a soft hush as the town folds into evening, and the stars blink overhead like sleepy eyes. Somewhere a dog barks. Far off, probably a stranger's mutt chasing the wind. But for a second, just a second, every head turns toward the sound. And now, as the streets of Harlingen grow quiet beneath the snowy hush of night, you find yourself walking just a little slower. The cobblestones are cool beneath your feet. The lanterns sway gently above, their warm light casting soft shadows that flicker like old memories. You pass by the taverns, windows glowing, laughter behind the glass. No one rushes. No one shouts. The beer flows easy, but it's poured with care, not urgency. Every pint, in its way, a small tribute. And when you reach the square, you pause. The statue of Speculus stands watch over the town. He never asked to lead. His eyes are carved kind, his tail forever mid-wag. Someone's placed a knit scarf around his neck. Another has left a small wooden barrel, just his size, beside his paw. The wind moves through your coat, but doesn't chill. It carries the sound of distant music, soft, sleepy, a lullaby hummed by old walls. And for a moment, time slows to a heartbeat and the town feels whole. No more scandal. No more barked verdicts. Just peace. Just legacy. You breathe in. Let the night settle into your bones. And as you turn back toward the inn, toward your bed, you find yourself smiling. Not because everything is perfect, but because somehow a town once divided found its common ground in a dog with nothing to prove. Sleep easy tonight, knowing that sometimes the most ridiculous things we believe in end up being the most right. And if you ever doubt yourself, just remember, one bark really can change everything.